Hello there, dear listeners. This is Alex and Stu here. Just
Hello.
with a quick note before this episode. So this is our really exciting first ever guest episode with the comedian Wil Hodgson. And just to let you know that when we recorded this, it was such a good, rich chat that it ended up being enough material to make 2 episodes. So we've decided to split them into the one you'll hear now, which is a more sort of focused episode on different topics of the 90s and nostalgia, and then there's going to be a bonus episode which will be on your streams next week, which will be a more in-depth chat about the local area that Wil and also me and Stu grew up in. So there may be some references in this first episode that make it sound like we're referring to things that haven't been said. The reason for that is because we're doing it out of order. So, anything to add to that, Stu? Have I butchered that explanation?
I think you explained it very well, mate, for what is actually a very complex situation we found ourselves in. So, enjoy both episodes on their own merit. But yeah, just be advised that there might be some references to stuff in the episode you'll hear now, which you won't have heard yet, and we'll be coming along in the second episode next week. But Wil is a great guy. It was a pleasure to talk with him, and we're sure you'll enjoy both episodes anyway. So enjoy.
Yeah, have a good listen. I'm going to definitely edit out me saying have a good listen at me.
Hello and welcome once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, where we're sending our love and support to Linford Christie, Sally Gunnell, Steve Backley and all of the other British athletes competing in Barcelona at the 1992 Summer Olympic Games. My name's Stu Joslin, and with me as always is the freshly Paul Gascoigne haired Alex Greenwood. Greenie, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. It's true, my hair has changed colour. I wasn't actually inspired by Paul Gascoigne. Actually, maybe for the purposes of the pod, I'll say that I was, because he's the most 90s bleached haired person, isn't he? I think, of course, we're referring to Euro 96, but I'm good.
Didn't Robbie Williams do it when he went off the rails and turned up at Glastonbury with Oasis?
Have you got any better references than that? I don't want that to be what people are thinking of when they see me at the moment. But I think you might be right. I know what you mean.
I'll put some research in and do some more next time. I promise.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm good. There is a thunderstorm rolling over as we record this, so if I suddenly cut out or if I get zapped through my microphone and sort of explode, that'll be why. But hopefully, hopefully you can't hear that.
And nice one getting in the 90s children's TV show Zap there as an oblique reference in your.
Oh yeah, with the comic one with the.
That's right.
We had like Daisy.
Daisy dares you.
The hands and stuff. I'm just throwing out these 90s references. I don't even realise I'm doing it.
This is it. This is what the audience want. Anyway, before we go any further, we should just mention that we are sponsored on this episode of It'll Be Alright in the 90s by Dolan and Aitchison, the opticians. If you buy any pair of spectacles for $69.99 or more at Dolan and Aitchison and mention the code ALRIGHT90s, you'll receive a stylish pair of prescription sunglasses absolutely free. So that's a sight more value and a shade more style at Dolan and Aitchison. And that's our sponsor for this week. Thanks to the guys at DNA for doing that. Fantastic.
Yeah. Nice one, lads. Brilliant work.
I believe you've got some correspondence over there to start us off.
I do, yes. This relates to our previous episode, which was, of course, on computer games of 1990 to 1994.
Indeed.
So the first half of the decade. A friend of the pod, Mole, has messaged us with his personal top 3, and he's very much a Sonic over Mario person here. So he's gone for Sonic the Hedgehog, and he thinks, if he had to pick one, then it would be Sonic 2, which he elaborates was the first to feature Tail. Is it Tail or is it Tails?
Tails, I think.
Tails, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's gone for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Street Fighter 2, and he said that he thinks it's Mortal Kombat was maybe cooler, but he wasn't so good at that, so he's chosen Street Fighter 2. I don't know how you feel, but I think Street Fighter 2, I had both on the Amiga at various points, And Street Fighter 2 was a big favourite in our house. So I think that's better. And maybe he's right about Mortal Kombat being cooler at the time because, all the blood and finishing moves and stuff. But I think now Street Fighter's gone back to being the coolest. Like, in hindsight, Street Fighter's got this real cachet that Mortal Kombat doesn't. It just wasn't as good for a start. Street Fighter 2 was just brilliant, but
I'd have to agree. It wasn't really in my wheelhouse, the fighting games, I must admit. But whenever I did play one with friends or wherever I was, it was always Street Fighter that seemed to be the optimum choice. So yeah, with my limited capacity for analysing this subject, I will agree.
Yeah, although I will say Reptile, who sort of appeared occasionally in Mortal Kombat, the first one at least, is one of the coolest computer game characters ever, if anyone remembers him. And Mole's third and final choice was Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco Grand Prix 2, which is quite a mouthful. And I've never heard of it, but he says it was just a superb F1 racer for its time. So quite niche, but props for choosing another racing game like I did. And he also did give a couple of shout outs to Streets of Rage 2 and WWF Royal Rumble. So good choices there, Mole. Thank you for messaging us and giving us some correspondence that we can actually read out.
Instead of all the abuse we get, absolutely.
Yeah, it's nice to have something positive. Yeah.
No, that's a great list. And please do keep them coming in. We want to hear if you're just starting up, if you're just catching up with us, our previous episodes. We want to hear your opinions on anything, right back to the episode 1 with the football kits. Let us know. Again, PC Crossland, if you're out there from the Police Camera Action episode, let us know. Get in touch. We'd love to have you on the pod. I've also got some correspondence here. Again, from regular contributor to the Postbag, Alex, who's got in touch regarding the adverts episode. So that's from a couple of weeks ago now. And he's sent through a link to an advert which came to mind. And he says it's annoying that it falls outside the 90s remit, which it does. But having had both of us view it, I think it definitely deserves a mention. This is an ad from 1984, and the tagline is "British Pork's got the lot." And it's a very sinister man reciting. Would you say it's a poem? It's definitely got some sort of rhythm to it, hasn't it? It's not just prose. And it's dinner time, and his wife is plating up the dinner, and he's likening his wife to the pork. That's the way that I read it. My wife's got the lot, and so's British Pork, all this sort of thing. I'm not too sure, but very, very sinister. And I can't really believe that it actually got transmitted in that state, I think. But we will put the shovel link out to that so you can see it for yourself. And let us know what you think of that, please.
Got what it takes, my wife. Got friends round. Got roast pork for lunch. Plenty of taste, British folk. We've all got plenty. Plenty to go round. My wife's got what it takes.
Yeah, it was absolutely. I hadn't seen it before until Alex sent it in, and it is brilliant. You definitely have to watch it on when we post it on our socials, because it's both terrifying and hilarious. Well worth a watch.
Maybe we should just to put in the ideas book for future episodes. Maybe we could do a spin-off episode. It'll be all right in the 80s, where we go and mop up all the things that we haven't been able to talk about, like the David Jason British Telecom adverts and things like that. There's an idea.
We could.
Keep
it could be like
a back pocket.
Yeah, or it could be an anti-episode where we just slag off everything in the 80s and say how rubbish it was compared to the 90s. It'll not be all right in the 80s.
It'll be terrible in the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay. Watch out for that coming soon. Well, today's episode, we're honoured and privileged. It's our first interview episode. We've got a special guest coming on to give us their take on the 90s. And I'm very proud to say that our first guest is going to be the stand-up comedian and barber, Wil Hodgson. Been looking forward to this. I was very hopeful when I sent him the message and asked him if he'd like to appear, that he would, because I know that he's got great knowledge about the decade and beyond, and I was very, very keen to get him on, and I'm so pleased he's agreed. So let's get into the chat, shall we? Our guest this time on It'll Be Alright in the 90s is somebody with so many strings to their bow. Stand-up comedian, barber, raconteur, podcaster, comic artist, pop culture expert, and of course, doyen of the People's Republic of Chippenham. Here to share his own unique take on the 90s, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome onto the pod Wil Hodgson. Wil, thanks for joining us, mate. How are you tonight?
No, thanks very much for having me, mate. I'm not too bad, thanks. Not too bad. How are you guys?
Yeah.
Lovely, thanks,
good.
Mate. Lovely. Absolutely buzzing to have you on. We really are.
It's a pleasure to be on here, mate.
Before we start, I think just to drop it in, I think Alex is. You've been in the same room as Alex before, in a place and a time far, far away.
Yeah. I mean, you won't remember because I was just part of an audience, Wil, but I attended your Blue Ribbon event at actually, why did I say Blue Ribbons? I don't know what Blue Ribbon means. It was just it was the stand up in Lancaster Uni. It must have been 2004 or 5 as part of the comedy night there at the Sugar House. I don't know if you remember that as being a particularly
was I with Marek Larwood or with Joanna Neary? I've done it a couple of times.
I can't remember at all, I'm afraid. I remember a few of the names that came around, as part of that sort of cycle.
I remember there was like an indie night afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. It was Thursday nights at the Sugar House. It was the best night of the week. It was comedy, stand-up comedy, and then indie or rock night afterwards, and it was just like the
I remember it. I remember me and Marek Larwood went down around about. I think I went 2 or 3 times. I went with Marek Larwood once, but it could have been 2005. It might even have been probably was. Anyway, we went down and it was. We stayed at this B&B that was like this kind of old couple ran it, and they were saying like, "Oh, you got to be up for breakfast at 7 in the morning," and we got horrendously drunk, pair of us, and it was like we were like it was the worst thing. And up in the morning, both absolutely hanging, and this old boy's all sort of chirpy, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed first thing in the morning. It was like it was absolutely. I think that's the drunkest I've ever got after a gig. That was, and I remember going down again with. Might even have been with John Richardson because he was that's where he's from.
Oh yeah, of course he is. Yeah,
I think I went down there with him. Went down there several times, but yeah, it's good to sort of meet you. We might have met on the night. I was so drunk that first time we went down. I still remember it now.
Yeah, I probably was afterwards as well because drinking throughout the rock night. But I mean, I just remember the key moment was just. When you said you were from Chippenham, and I had no idea, you were just like, the comedian who was there that night, and just being like, I can't believe there's someone from Northwest Wiltshire, like on this in Lancaster. It was just, buzzing from that. But,
everyone's got to be somewhere in it, but that's brilliant. That's what it's sort of like. I'm sort of always like kind of part representing and part like kind of having a dig at Chippenham. Really, I've got a real love-hate sort of relationship with the place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's good to see you though, mate.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Yeah, cool. Well, I think now we'd like to sort of go through some quick fire subjects of the ones that we've discussed on the pod already. So we've already recorded and released a few episodes about these things, and we'd just like to ask you for your take and memories and favourites of these from the decade. So first of all, do you have any particular fond memories about any cars, either you owned or your family owned? Any favourite cars of the decade?
None whatsoever, mate. I've never driven, and I couldn't even tell you what car anyone owned. I witnessed a bank robbery once in Chippenham, and the old bill were like driven up the wall because I was like wheels, whatever. It was a ram raid. It nearly hit me, and they were like, "You seen it all?" I'm like, "It was definitely a car." Enough about cars, mate.
Like Chief Wiggum, he's driving a car of some description.
Yeah, exactly like Chief Wiggum, which wasn't what they wanted at the time.
Okay.
My car Chippenham connection is that I did my year 9 work experience at Arriva Ford in Chippenham on what's that road called?
Cocklebury Road?
Yeah, Cocklebury Road, yeah, where the old cattle market was. And it was the worst 2 weeks of my life. But we'll move on from that. Maybe we'll say that for another pod, my work experience story. Okay, well, Wil, what about your favorite record, or the record that, I mean, this is hard. I know you've already said quite a lot of bands, and like obviously you're quite deep into the music scene.
Yeah, indeed.
So this is going to be really difficult, but is there a record that maybe sums up the decade, or was for you summed up the decade?
In terms of an album, it would have to be. I'm going to say that Black Grape one, Great When You're Straight.
Carlos Jackal.
Part of me wants to say Oasis, definitely, maybe, as like the sort of like, because it's got to be a Britpop one for the 90s. So, or it could equally be In Utero by Nirvana, because like we said, the 90s seems like things changed around a lot. I'm going to say Great When You're Straight, just because it doesn't get as much. Everyone rightly goes on about like Definitely Maybe and The Great Escape and Compiel Different Class and all of that, but Great When You're Straight doesn't get as much kudos, I don't think, and I think that was the best album of the year of 95. Just absolutely perfect. That's the best thing Sean Ryder's ever done. It's the best thing that Bez has ever stood skinning up in the studio recording and then like appeared on stage waving the rap. It's a genuinely great album. Every time I hear that, it always reminds me of just like the summer and like Chippenham in the summer in the 90s or whatever, just reminding college and all that. Just like CK1 After, I can smell CK1 Aftershave if I listen to that album. CK1 Aftershave and Two Dogs Alcoholic Lemonade. That was the album of the summer. That was.
Oh, nice,
fantastic.
What was Black Grape's big single? There's this sort of band where I can't name anything, but if I hear them, I kind of.
There was In the Name of the Father and Kelly's Heroes. Don't talk to me about heroes. Most of these base cocaine. That one, and they did a football one as well with Joe Strummer and Keith Allen was all over them Euro '96 records because he was on Vindaloo and he was on that Irie one with it was Black Grape, Joe Strummer, Keith Allen, and I think it might even have had some kind of Primal Scream connection as well. No, Primal Scream did another one with Irving Welsh. They did the one that's for the Scotland team that was like a dub thing with Irving Welsh doing a big rant about how much he hates Heart of Midlothian. It was loads of like football records that year. It was like a golden year for it. But see, Three Lines is another one that could possibly be like a record that summed up the 90s in some ways because it's that Euro '96 thing and all the.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of a timeless one now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure, it's been number one about 5 times now, isn't it, or something like that on different occasions. I think it's the record holder now. Yeah,
must be that or Slade's Christmas one. That's the one you want, football one or a Christmas one.
That's the ticket to a healthy pension is a successful football or Christmas record. So I want to move over to video games now, and I want to begin by asking you. I heard you talking on another podcast, and I think it was with regards to the Master System. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I think you were talking about you were playing a game where you couldn't save it, and you had the system turned on for about 3 weeks, and then your mate switched it off by accident. Is that right?
Psycho Fox, yeah, he did, and I would have struck him. I just couldn't. I thought about it. My mum would have struck him if she'd have known about it because she'd been playing it as well. That was Psycho Fox on the Master System. That was a underrated game. It's a bit like Super Mario Brothers. It was clearly supposed to be like the rival game to it. You're a fox and you can change into. You have to collect a lot of various things that you use, but you can change in theory to different animals that are suited to different things. So the fox is an all-rounder. The monkey can jump really high. The hippo can punch through walls, but he's really sluggish. And the tiger does like fast running and long jumping, distance jumping. So you have to use all those kind of things to complete the game. I've never completed it, and every time I start playing it I've got a arcade machine that's got an emulator in it. And every now and again I'll play Psycho Fox, and I'll think I'm getting too much into this. I have to avoid getting the same. You can't afford the same sort of addiction you get to games in the summer holidays, but back then as now. So then Sonic the Hedgehog come out a bit after that, and that just completely blew everything out of the water. That was a good Christmas, mate. That was Sonic the Hedgehog Christmas.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
No, yeah, sounds brilliant.
What about films? Again, it's I know it's really hard to pin down one from a decade like this, but was there a film that you remember going to see at the what was it called again? What was the Chippenham cinema called again?
Everyone calls it the Flea Pit, but the Astoria or whatever. It used to be a canon.
Yeah,
it'd have to be either, in terms of a memorable film of going to the cinema, it's got to be Reservoir Dogs, because of all the people getting up and walking out when he cut that bloke's ear off.
Oh, yeah.
There were people got up and walked, and there was like a couple got up and walked when he cut the bloke's ear off. Then we started dousing him with petrol, and the cop was like begging for his life. There's about 3 or 4 people got up and walked out. It looks like nothing now, but that was quite gratuitous and scary for the time it was. That was about 94. But then I saw Pulp Fiction down there as well, and I can't that was immediately what sprung to mind when you said film 90s. Immediately, right in my head, there is Pulp Fiction right about there. A lot of other people probably said that. That is, I think that's probably the most iconic film of the 90s in a lot of ways. But there was a lot of other ones like I'm trying to think what one as iconic as that, and I just can't to me. Lock, Stock, I remember that, was enjoying that a lot at the time. Pulp Fiction and Dogs, you know what I mean? Like Tarantino, when he was on, I'll tell you what no one ever talks about now, really, Natural Born Killers. That was like a big pop culture thing when it came out in the 90s. So I was doing media studies, and we all loved, like, mind you, Goodfellas was 1990, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, I believe so.
I'm going to go for Goodfellas, because if there weren't Goodfellas, there wouldn't have been Reservoir Dogs, and there wouldn't have been Pulp Fiction. I think Goodfellas was the one that 1990, and it set the tone for those sort of films. I think that always associate the 90s with them sort of films. Them kind of before, when gangster films, before they sort of descended into like sort of straight to DVD things with Beach Out of the Bill and a load of blokes young enough to be his grandkids doing stuff about crystal meth dealing and all of that. And you can see that he's sort of like, right, I used to be in the bill at one point still. Could buy myself a new Range Rover with the proceeds from this Essex Boys. There's been more films made about that bloke Pat Tate than about like Winston Churchill. And he's just like he's a doorman from Essex that was involved in like drug dealing. You wonder what like his mum might think about this. There's sort of like yet another action-packed film with Craig Fairbrass as Pat Tate. It's like none of this stuff is ever. This one was a sequel. This one I was watching the other day is Essex Boys Retribution, and it's like, what? This is a real bloke you got here. He's sort of like, oh, this is what this happened. This bloke the film was about. He sat in jail doing like a life sentence for shooting some blokes in a Range Rover, and he's like, actually sort of like they got the bloke who was Beach in the Bill playing me in a sequel that I'm narrating. He'd be like, sort of like, just let me out or something if you're just going to use my thing for this. But yeah, I reckon Goodfellas, just because it kind of all that kind of the sort of films that I associate with the 90s. That was the kind of daddy of it, and it's if that's ever on the telly and I'm flicking around the channels, it comes on no matter what point it is. I'll watch it right the way through. Goodfellas, it's perfect film. It's just got not an ounce of fat on it. It's long, but it's like you're in. It's sort of like, here I am killing some bloke in the back of a boot. What are you doing that for, Ray Liotta? Well, I'm going to tell you in a very fast-paced kind of stuff. Brilliant film. Film.
Yeah, good gateway to the 90s, isn't it? I think that as a film. So, yeah. Superb.
So moving on then to the small screen, we've already mentioned a lot of the well, certainly in my opinion, and also obviously yours, the best series of the 90s, such as Simpsons, Seinfeld, and Father Ted, etc. But is there one that you would pick out above all the rest?
Larry Sanders. Larry Sanders Show, the best program about being a performer ever made. It's so much of being a performer is about someone said this on something I watched the other day, and they were right. I can't remember who they said. It's about big ego and low self-esteem and paranoia, and that's what the Larry Sanders thing's about. It's about the sort of dark undercurrent of being a performer and how you're paranoid and about how you kind of like and fearful of everything and just very kind of like the Larry Sanders character has got like he's like that. He's got no kind of like respect for himself, but he's also like very sort of fragile and fragile egoed and stuff. And there's some brilliant writing in it. The lines in it, especially Rip Torn's character, Artie, the stage manager. There's some, and they're just perfect characters. I'm surprised it's not on any streaming stuff. It should be, because there's probably people that have never seen it that are into stuff like that's in that kind of, like, it wasn't like a mockumentary, but you had the bits that were supposed to be the Larry Sanders Show were like filmed on video. And then you have these film bits with like no audience backstage. The first time you see it, it takes you a while to figure out what it is you're actually watching, because this was kind of new. And it was Chandler got offered, I think he got offered the Johnny Carson thing before Jay Leno took it. He didn't want to do it. He wrote this about like what he reckoned it would have done to his sanity being where Jay Leno was. It's brilliant. I would just recommend anyone who's not seen that. You could probably get a box set of it for about 10 quid from CEX or whatever. It's absolutely brilliant program. I could just watch that. Brilliant characters. You got Gary Shandling, is Jeffrey Tambor, Janine Garofalo's brilliant in it. There's just loads. Sarah Silverman. There's just really, really good performances, brilliant lines, and it's just kind of investing and affected. It used to be a great one to watch when I was like doing comedy full time. If there was something that kind of upset me, that'd be a good thing to watch, because it just shows you that you're not that you're like being reasonable, but that other people feel like you do. Other people are as paranoid as you are, I think.
That's been on my list for a long time, I must admit, and I've not got round to it, so I'm going to have to move it up a few notches. Truly
brilliant. It's also, you can just start at the beginning. It's kind of like, it's not like a one where it sort of like it takes a while to get going. It's just, the first one it's like that. It gets better as people, obviously, because everything does when people get into the swing of things, you get invested. But it's kind of, there's no messing about at the start. It's just straight in, like, this is what it is. And it goes on from there. Brilliant program.
Great, yeah. I also have never watched it, which I feel embarrassed about now. But yeah, I'm going to have to.
Well, they used to show it at midnight on BBC Two, so most people haven't seen it because of the ridiculous times it was on, because of the incredibly bad language. I think it was very sweary for the time, and it was on at odd times of the night. And Seinfeld as well, which you would have thought would have been you would have thought that would have been on proper times, because Seinfeld was clean. It's prime time in America. There's no reason that couldn't have been on BBC One after EastEnders on a Friday and built following over here. But the BBC were they always had good American stuff. They seemed weird about putting it on like, they could have put that on 8:30 but instead they would be like, oh well, let's put that thing where Amanda Holden's a circus ringmaster on instead. Like, people, rather than not what's acknowledged to be the best American sitcom of the minute, will put that on. Same with, I mean, if we work with Friends, do you know what I mean? That was very American, and that worked just because they put it on at times people could see it. I think the same thing. I mean, you couldn't have had Larry Sanders like with the sort of language in that at like 6 o'clock. You could have had Seinfeld on it at like 8 o'clock in the evening, I would have thought.
Yeah, especially when you consider how popular Frasier was. I mean, Frasier still, as far as I know, is on constant rotation on Channel 4 weekday mornings. So, yeah.
Am I right in imagining I've mentioned this on other things before. I've never got closure on this, trying to find it, and I'm sure this is real. There used to be a trailer on Paramount Comedy Channel with Mad Frankie Fraser, the gangster, advertising Frasier. And it was Mad Frank. He was like, the brothers, I knew them back in the day. Like, they've got up to some right funny business, and there'd be like clips from Fraser. I just can't find it anyone. I used to think, like, does Mad Frankie watch Frasier? And if they called, of course, they phoned me up and said you ought to do it. Of course, I was delighted. I was just watching this with Charlie Richardson the other day. God, there's very well constructed plots, isn't it, Jar? Yeah. One day I'm going to track that down.
I remember Mad Frankie Fraser appearing on an episode of Shooting Stars, and really not knowing what was going on.
I met him around in the 90s. Me and my mum met him at a book signing thing, and he was scary. So he's little bloke, he's smaller than my mum, but like terrifying. He goes, he signed my book, and he wrote to Will, love Frankie Fraser, and then he stops and he goes back and he wrote mad in front of it. He goes, I said like you were talking about like about sort of vague bits and pieces about your mental health in prison and that. And so like you call yourself Mad Frankie, and he goes, well, I can hardly call myself sane Frankie Fraser, can I, boy?
I love the idea of being so intimidating that you could be scary at a book signing. That's a real sign of
brilliant.
of your status. Isn't it?
Scary Waterstones in Swindon.
Okay, what about, is there an event of the 90s that you think sums up the decade?
That I was at? Or
doesn't have to be, doesn't not necessarily. I think it could be anything, something you just watched or something you were at, yeah. Something you took part in, maybe.
One that immediately springs to mind is Jarvis Cocker invading the stage at the Brit Awards.
Yeah.
Of course.
Because that's, one, it was memorable, and two, it was a good kind of like a changing of tone, because when you think about how much people my age, I'm 42, so one thing we all liked in the 80s was Michael Jackson. We all loved Michael Jackson and Thriller and Bad and all that, Dangerous, some of it, do you know what I mean? But that was what we were all into, and Moonwalker and all that kind of thing. It's frightening when you think about all the stuff you hear about him now, do you know what I mean? Because you're like, we were all like young lads that were like, that hero worshipped him and all of that. So that's the bloody scary bit of it. But it was but by then I was sort of thinking like sort of, oh, he's gone like absolutely bloody snooker loopy now, and this Earth song thing and all, he was doing all of that, and it was Jarvis. It's like the thing that I like now, coming on stage and like baring his ass. We didn't bare his ass, but you know what I mean? He was like pointed his ass at him, and that was very 90s, because there was that, and then there was he was on TFI Friday with Chris Evans and that. So that's like that'd be one, that, or there's a few EastEnders ones from the 90s that I'd say were like iconic as well. Grant and Phil driving off the bridge and everything.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Astromark too.
Yeah. And the Spice Girls, I love the Spice Girls. I still do love the Spice Girls. The Spice Girls at the Brit Awards, and that they're all going to be mostly sort of pop cultural ones and quite obvious ones. But then they were kind of. I'm going to say Jarvis and Michael Jackson. That's just like a total kind of, that's sort of like where pop music was at, and and it was the kind of almost sort of like, I remember thinking at the time, sort of like, why did the Brits think anyone would be interested in Michael Jackson? I still do love Thriller and Bad, but it's very difficult to actually sit down and listen to them now. Do you know what I mean? Because like, even, I'm not saying anything's true or not true, but there's like enough kind of like, if you heard it about a bloke down the pub that was a pipe fitter, you wouldn't want to listen to him singing a song called Pretty Young Thing. No. Like deliberately, but I still like, if like Human Nature or whatever comes, I still like it. But yeah, that'd be my like event of the 90s, would be that one.
Great. Cool. Is there any sort of wild card subject, something we haven't spoken about? Obviously, we've had such a wide ranging conversation, but is there anything that we haven't spoken about from the 90s that you feel warrants a mention in this forum?
From the 90s, I don't know, just little things, you know. As I said to someone the other day, like about the amount of like bright green sort of dresses made of non-natural material that girls used to wear to nightclubs at Oscars and stuff in the mid-90s. We're talking about Oscars and that, and like getting wrecked at Oscars and turning up at work the next day, like still completely bloody wired and that. If it was talking about Oscars like 96, 97, and like sort of girls in like sort of green, like sort of acrylic sort of dresses, and blokes in like kind of bright coloured check shirts and that. And like Alco Pops and stuff. There's a certain, like, again, I'm getting that CK1 thing. That'd be the one thing I put in is CK1 aftershave. That to me sums up the 90s. Just smelling that. Same as if I smell Play-Doh, I think of the 80s. If I smell CK1 aftershave, I immediately think that you never forget a smell. So CK1 aftershave, and also everyone goes on about Hooper's Hooch, but it was Two Dogs was the superior alcoholic lemonade back then. They should make that again. I wouldn't drink it, but they should make it again just to satisfy my equilibrium of the world.
There's our episode title: CK1 and Two Dogs.
Well, they brought Hooch back, didn't they? So I can see there's a market for resurrecting the classics. Okay, so yeah, maybe to wrap it up, there's one final question, which was, how would you say the decade shaped you into the person that you are now?
I would say that it was all of the. I would say it was all the stuff that I kind of consumed then came in handy later. As I already mentioned, like the very, very small Chippenham punk scene and all of that, the influence of like Fred Frantic and stuff, reading loads and loads of Irving Welsh books off the back of Train Spotting and reading, and I still do reread. That's my favourite author by far. And these were all the things that were huge influences on what I did for the next 20 years after that. And so that is the decade that made me, because I grew up literally in the 90s. I was like 11 till like sort of 22, whatever. That was like on the other end of it, I was like a grown man. So that was like the puberty, teenage years, first like drink, first fag, all that kind of thing. Being in the Sea Cadets, which I've not really talked much about, but that was a huge thing on my life as well. I loved all of that, and that was the time. I still cut the hair at blokes that I grew up with in the 90s, and we still talk about endlessly about then. It's what the main thing we talk about. It's just that was our time. We're not sort of little kids in the 80s, yeah, but because we were born in like the late 70s. But yeah, the 90s, that was our 60s, and it's scary because I played darts with lads, and they were sort of like, Drew that I played darts with was asking me what it was like Chippenham was like in the Britpop times. I was like sort of crusty, like you wouldn't know, like sort of this was our, like when you hear about like the 60s, like our dad's generation, and like mods, and like going to like the West End Club and the Dave Clark 5, and people breaking the floor, dancing to the Who and all that kind of thing, and like going down to Western Supermare and all that sort of stuff. That was our 60s, was the 90s, and for like people that were ravers, it was that whole other thing, and all of that permeated everything really. But yeah, that was the time, some of the worst times of my life and some of the really good times as well, but all stuff that makes me nostalgic. So yeah, definitely I think it made everyone who grew up in it, for better or for worse.
I have one question actually for you, Will. I've done an extensive Google search for this, and you are the perfect person to ask, because I couldn't find any answers. But did Chippenham Library once have a working water wheel in the foyer? I'm so convinced it did, but no one I've ever asked remembers it.
Now you say that, I want to go no, but I don't think I can go no, because I'm
so distinctly remember it as a kid.
Maybe there was. I'm going to look into that.
Great, thank you very much.
I'm going to find out.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
Are you on Twitter? I know We Hope It's Chips is on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on at Wil Hodgson with one L on Twitter. And I haven't done anything on my Facebook page for ages. Twitter's probably the best place. And Instagram, Stone Cold Wil Hodgson on Instagram.
Is there anything else you're up to at the moment that you'd like us to put a little plug on at the end?
There's the Chippenham Comedy Club's back in September up the Old Road. I'm still doing the shoddily drawn porn comics are still a thing, and I'm still working on those, and just kind of still cutting hair at the barber shop, and just kind of getting sort of like gearing up to going back to stand up when the circuit is back, but it's going to have to be a hell of a lot less precarious for me to actually start getting on a train or a car and going places now. I think, it's just kind of like once we're through the winter and that, then I might want to, but I'm more terrified of getting pinged at the minute and not having to shut the shop for like 10 days or whatever. So yeah, that's basically that. I'm just kind of like still riding out the COVID really, and then wanting to get back into projects after that.
Yeah.
Well, stuff. I've been absolutely spellbound for the last hour and a half. It was absolutely fantastic. Will, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh well, no, I'm really glad to hear it. No, please do come back on, and we'll talk again, I'm sure. But no, that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure the listeners will love it. So Wil Hodgson, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much,
yeah.
Ross. Thank you.
Okay, that was the end of the first half of our chat with Wil Hodgson. As I said at the start of this episode, there'll be a sort of bonus episode which will comprise more of an in-depth chat about Wil's life throughout the decade, and it's really great. Definitely recommend you tune into that as well. And yeah, we'll see you next week for that section.
Thanks for listening. See you next week for the bonus episode. Don't miss it.